All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about one of history's most iconic and complicated rulers, Catherine the Great of Russia. She absolutely defined an era, ruling for a whopping 34 years. But her legacy? Wow, it's a complete puzzle, a profound contradiction that we're going to try and unpack. See, on one hand, you have the enlightened ruler. This is the Catherine who was pen pals with philosophers like Voltaire, who founded the first state-funded school for women, who talked all about reason and progress. But then, there's the other side. The brutal autocrat who mercilessly crushed rebellions and actually deepened the horrors of serfdom, literally turning half her population into private property. So which one was the real Catherine? That's the question.
To even begin to understand her, you've got to know two absolutely crucial facts. First, she wasn't even Russian. She was born a minor German princess named Sophie. And second, she had absolutely no legitimate claim to the Russian throne. None.
So that really is the million-dollar question, right? How on earth does a German outsider with zero claim to power wind up ruling the largest empire on the planet for more than 3 decades?
The answer is as simple as it is shocking. She didn't inherit it. She didn't win it. She took it.
All right, so let's get into the story of her absolutely audacious rise to power. It's a tale of incredible ambition, political savvy, and a perfectly timed coup d'etat. So get this. She shows up in Russia at just 16 years old to marry the heir, Peter III. And she was smart. Right away, she dove headfirst into the culture, learning the language, converting to Russian Orthodoxy, and becoming Catherine. And it didn't take her long to figure out that her new husband was, well, a total disaster. He was unpopular with pretty much everyone who mattered, the military, the nobles, and he just didn't seem to care about Russia. His weakness was her golden opportunity.
And believe me, she did not wait around. On June 28, 1762, with the help of her lover Grigory Orlov, she rallied the military regiments, had herself declared the one and only ruler, and had her own husband arrested. Just a couple of weeks later, Peter was dead, killed by his guards. And just like that, how convenient, right? Her biggest rival was simply gone.
So now she's on the throne. But how do you stay there when you have no right to it? You need a good story. You need to justify your rule. And Catherine, she was brilliant. She grabbed onto the hottest political philosophy of the day, the Enlightenment. She championed this idea called Enlightened Absolutism. And the name itself kind of tells the whole story, right? There's this massive tension baked right in. On one hand, you're using principles like reason and logic to govern for the common good. But, and this is a huge but, the monarch gets to keep all the power. I mean, all of it. No checks, no balances, nothing.
She even laid this whole vision out in a famous document she wrote, the Nakaz, or Instruction. It was packed with these lofty ideals she borrowed from French philosophers. I mean, listen to this quote from it. "The goal of a monarchy is the glory of its citizens." For the 18th century, this was mind-blowing stuff. It sounded incredible.
But, yeah, here's where the beautiful ideas on paper smash right into the wall of cold, hard reality. The Nakaz talked about legal equality for everyone, and it even hinted at freeing the serfs, that huge class of people who were basically slaves. But Catherine knew her grip on power depended entirely on the support of the nobility, the very people who owned all the serfs. So the big commission she set up to make these reforms happen, it went absolutely nowhere.
And you know, this wasn't just some abstract problem they could debate in fancy salons. Oh no. This failure to deal with the serfs, it was a ticking time bomb, and it was about to explode into a wave of violence that would completely define her reign and force her to choose a side.
That explosion was Pugachev's Rebellion. We're talking 1773 to 1775. This became the single biggest peasant revolt in all of Russian history. It was a direct consequence of just how terrible life had become for the serfs, and it was, without a doubt, the greatest threat she ever faced.
So how did our enlightened empress respond? Well, let's just say it wasn't very enlightened. It was brutal, utterly ruthless. The imperial army crushed the revolt, and it's estimated they killed around 10,000 rebels just in the final battle and its aftermath. Pugachev himself was captured, dragged to Moscow in a cage, beheaded, and then dismembered.
And this right here, this is where you see the mask slip, and the true autocrat comes out. After this unbelievably brutal suppression, she didn't just move on. She issued an official order that the rebellion was to never be mentioned again. She even renamed the towns and rivers that were involved, literally trying to erase the entire event from history.
So, okay, her grand enlightened plans for society are pretty much in tatters, and she's just secured her rule through brute force. What does she do next? She turns her focus outward. If she couldn't perfect Russia from within, she was going to make it bigger and more powerful on the world stage.
And you know what? She was incredibly good at it. First, she takes on the Ottoman Empire in 2 separate wars, and finally achieves this age-old Russian dream, getting warm water ports on the Black Sea by conquering Crimea. Then, she turns her attention west, to Poland, and basically carves it up, absorbing massive territories like Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine into her empire.
Just to put a number on that, over 500,000 square kilometers were added to the Russian Empire under her watch. That is bigger than the entire country of Spain today. Just incredible expansion.
But it wasn't all about armies and conquering land. Catherine was a master of what we'd now call soft power. She founded the world-famous Hermitage Museum to show off Russia's cultural sophistication. She set up that pioneering school for women. And she was a savvy diplomat, forming things like the League of Armed Neutrality to make sure Russia was a major player in European politics.
All right, so let's try to pull all these threads together. How do we make sense of this? The enlightened philosopher and the ruthless tyrant in one person. Well, the answer really comes down to this one massive trade-off she was forced to make right after that rebellion.
This is really the key to understanding her entire legacy. That rebellion scared her a lot. It proved that the central government was way too weak to actually control this massive empire. So what's the solution? She decides to empower the nobility, to make them her local administrators, but they wanted something big in return. They demanded a price for their loyalty, total, absolute, unchecked power over their serfs.
And in 1785, she made the deal official. It was a classic trade. The state got what it wanted, a stable administrative class to run the country, collect taxes, and keep order. The loyalty of the elite was secured. But what did the serfs get? Half the population? They lost everything. Any faint hope of freedom they might have had was gone. They were legally reduced to private property, and the state basically surrendered all authority over them to their landlords.
And that right there, that is the core paradox of Catherine the Great. She created this powerful, modern, European-style state on the world stage, but she built it on a social foundation that was just completely medieval and brutal.
Look, there's no question she was Catherine the Great. She made Russia bigger, stronger, and more influential than it had ever been. But her legacy forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question, one that still resonates today. Can a nation ever be considered truly great if that greatness is bought by treating half of its own people like property?